Welcome to our February office hour for the Office of Federal Emergency Relief Programs. This office hour is being recorded because we do upload the content of the office hours right onto our website. So if you have a colleague or someone that you've run into that you would like to share this information with, you have the avenue to be doing so. We're going to get started with some introductions. Please note that our team is also monitoring the chat box. So if you should have a question, don't hesitate to go ahead and put that right in the chat box. As I said, we are a small group, so we'll definitely open up the end of our office hour for any questions that you folks may have. So first, my name is Shelley Shassi-Jandro. I'm the director of the Office of Federal Emergency Relief Programs. Our colleague Monique Sullivan is not here today. She's our ARP coordinator. She is at the National ESSER Conference.
And I'm Karen Kusiak. I've been coordinating the CARES and CARISA programs and also work on a few special projects related to all of the ESSER funding streams.
I'm Kevin Harrington, and I'm the Gear and EANS coordinator.
Good morning. I am Maisha Asha. I am the fiscal coordinator.
Good morning. I'm Deanna Roberge, and I am a management analyst.
Good morning. I'm Terry Beal, and I'm a contracted invoice reviewer.
And I noticed that there's some folks in the chat who have introduced themselves. Thank you.
So we'll go ahead and get started. Today's topics and objectives. Today's topics include friendly reminders, disposition of federally funded purchases, new procedures, ARP invoice overages, preparation for the 2023 monitoring, and meetings, reference to construction projects. So today's objective, participants will be able to use ESSER funds effectively and in alignment with federal requirements. Update on ESSER facts. On December 7th, a document was issued in an update to the May 2021 facts. 27 new facts and updates to 8 of the existing facts were added to provide more robust information for grantees. New items are marked as new December 7th, 2022. And updated items are marked as updated December 7th, 2022. And below is the link to the updated ESSER facts requirements of December 7th, 2022. So updating GEMS contacts, which, as you know, has been an issue and needs to be a priority if possible, because it's the way we get our information to be able to contact folks, to be able to do things as quickly as possible. So FGRS updates, if you're an outgoing staff member or have the login and password to an outgoing staff member, go to the link www.4pcamain.org and select Federal Grant Reimbursement System. And there's an arrow pointing, I know it's a little bit small, but there's an arrow pointing on the bottom where it will tell you where to go and guide you through that. As application updates, updating superintendent and applicant coordinator information is done in the application setup page of each application. So if possible, as you see the highlighted areas where you can go, please update as much as possible. That just is a lifesaver for getting through these applications and invoices to get you back your money.
Okay, so let's talk about the disposition of federally funded purchases. Disposition is the process for transferring, donating, or selling supplies, equipment, and/or real property that are no longer needed for a federally funded project. Supplies are any tangible property that does not fall under the definition of equipment. Equipment is any tangible property, including IT systems, that have a useful life of more than 1 year and have a per unit cost that equals or exceeds $5,000. Real property is land, including improvements, structures, and appurtenances, but excludes movable machinery and equipment. When it comes to using supplies and equipment, if the residual inventory of unused supplies is less than $5,000 in total aggregate value, the supplies and/or tangible property may be used in any of these ways. They can be used if they are needed, whether or not the project continues to be supported by the federal award. They can be used for activities under another U.S. Department of Education federal award, or they can be used for activities under a federal award from other federal awarding agencies. Real property can be used for the authorized purpose of the project as long as it is needed, or in other federally sponsored projects as long as you obtain written approval by the federal awarding agency. Okay. In accordance with the CFR, when the supplies, equipment, or real property that was acquired with ESSER funding are no longer needed, the following steps should be followed. Request disposition instructions, calculate the fair market value, and then consider your disposition options. If the fair market value is less than $5,000, the supplies, equipment, or real property can be retained, sold, or disposed of. If that value is over $5,000, the supplies, equipment, or real property can only be retained or sold. Subrecipients may retain or transfer equipment, supplies, or real property to be used for other federally funded programs or projects. If the property is transferred, the subrecipient must be entitled to compensation for its attributable percentage of the current fair market value of the property. If a subrecipient chooses to retain or transfer the equipment, supplies, or real property, they must inform our office. Subrecipients may sell equipment, supplies, or real property, but must compensate the federal awarding agency. Per statute, the federal awarding agency is entitled to an amount calculated by multiplying the current market value or proceeds from a sale by the federal awarding agency's percentage of participation in the cost of the original purchase. If the equipment is sold, the federal awarding agency used may permit the non-federal entity, the LEA, to deduct and retain from the federal share $500 or 10% of the proceeds, whichever is less. Subrecipients may dispose of the equipment, supplies, or real property, again less than $5,000 fair market value, in any way it sees fit after receiving USED approval from our office.
So Terry, we did see your hand and we want to take questions when we can. So I think now is a great time
Okay.
to go ahead and open up the floor. So we do have two Terrys. So Terry Peasley, if you, perfect. I saw you unmute yourself. Great.
Thank you. This is a little intense. So who do we request disposition instructions from? I mean, does that come to you folks at the state level, or are we supposed to reach out to the feds? I mean, who are we requesting permission from?
So you should start requesting those instructions directly from the SEA's funding unit. So I say that very specifically. So if it was something that was funded with CARES, you would reach out to our office. If it was something that was funded with Title II, as you know, where I used to live, then you would reach out to the Title II ESEA team. So I think it's important to start with the pass-through agency, which is the SEA. And the SEA will work with their program officer to acquire the required information. But essentially what we have done as a team is we've taken this disposition information and already pre-shared it with our program officer before even publicizing it. And I think it's probably the second month or so that we sort of highlight this disposition, because these are the increasing questions that we seem to be receiving in the last month or so.
Okay, and going to step 2, who calculates the fair market value? And if it's the agency that is in possession of it, is there a policy and procedure that you guys disseminate as to how that has to be determined?
So there is some language within statute, Edgar and CFR specifically, that talks about that calculation of fair market value. And one of the things that, as you noted, Terry P, although that could get confusing, right? Terry P and Terry B.
Yeah.
So one thing to keep in mind is it is the non-federal entity who's calculating that fair market value. So it's the holder of the item. So in most of our situations, it's our school districts who are the ones calculating that fair market value.
Okay, and as long, again, it may be them that calculates it, but is there a set of federal regulations or statutes that say this is how you're going to do it?
There is. We put a shortened version of the information that we felt was pertinent in regards to the fair market value, but there is some statute language in regards to the calculation of it.
Okay, and you folks are available to help walk people through that process should they find themselves in over their heads?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
And the next slide is some great examples that Terry Beal will walk through.
Okay, so we have a minivan that was purchased to transport students experiencing homelessness. The need was identified due to the increase of students experiencing homelessness and limited shelters in the responsible SAU. The minivan was purchased in whole with ESSER funds, but there's no longer the need for this additional transportation and no other federal allowable use. The SAU would like to sell the minivan and has calculated the fair market value as $27,117. The SAU can sell the minivan and all but $500 or 10%, whichever is less, will be returned to the U.S. Department of Education. And then we have 84 used Apple MacBook Pro 15-inch 2019 Touch Bar with Core i9 processor. The need was identified due to hybrid learning and one-to-one access. The laptops were purchased in whole with ESSER funds, but there's no longer the need for one-to-one access. The SAU would like to sell 6 laptops and has calculated the fair market value as $969 per unit times 6 equals $5,814. The SAU can retain, sell, or dispose of these laptops.
Meaning if they sell them, they keep all of the money?
Yes.
Thank you.
I think the important part to note is what happens with an item that is purchased with federal funds is once it's no longer considered to be an allowable expense, that money needs to go to the U.S. Department of Ed. So if you were to sell an item that exceeds that fair market value of $5,000, it's not an opportunity to create revenue for our LEAs. And that's the key part to consider, right? We have a number of schools that have done some repair work. They have maybe added some playground equipment. They've added computers, they've added staff. But really the concept of the disposition is if it increased an opportunity to create a revenue for that LEA, that revenue is no longer an allowable expense or an allowable notion within these federal funds. And for me, that has helped me think about, well, what does this mean when we're disposing goods, in particular, that were purchased with federal funds?
So in this slide, we would like to give you a friendly reminder. So to be aligned with the federal requirement, all SAUs had to set aside at least 20% of their ARP funds initially to address learning loss through the implementation of evidence-based interventions. So some of the SAUs budgeted for exactly the same amount as 20% of ARP allocation, and some did little, more than what is more than the amount of 20% of ARP allocation. Whichever the case is, now SAUs has to make sure that they are spending at least 20% of the ARP fund on the reservation projects. So here is a example. So where you can see the total allocation, ARP fund allocation is $560,000.56. 20% of that amount is $112,000.11. So in this table, you can see they have budgeted for in total $117,411 for the reservation projects, which is over their 20% reservation amount. However, they need to make sure at least this $112,000.11 they are spending on these reservation projects. So in this slide, we will see there is a change in 10% overage calculation for ARP invoices, which will be effective from today, February 2nd, 2023. So as of yesterday, our current process was expenses cannot be submitted in a budget category that does not have an associated budget. An invoice can over-expend in multiple categories if that overage is offset in another category and collectively does not exceed 10% of SAU allocation. So that is our process for all other grants as well, like for ESSER 2. So that will remain same, but for ESSER 3 or ARP, it is going to change from today. And our new process is expenses cannot be submitted in a budget category that does not have an associated budget as per their application. And invoice can over-expend in a project budget category if the overage does not exceed 10% of the project budget. So we will see an example that will clear what we are saying here in a bit. So in this example, in the below, you can see from that table that there is a reservation project, additional social worker support. And for this project, the total allocation is $1,181.92. So if we calculate the 10% overage for this project, the amount would be $118.19. So as per our new process, this SAU will be allowed up to $118.19 if they are if we are allowing them 10% overage, but they cannot submit any invoice under this project which is over this amount. So in here in the table, it is a snapshot of their one of the invoice, and we can see they have $118.08, which is exceed in their salary category, and they were budgeted for $1,181.92. So sorry, yeah, I'm correct. So $1,181.92, but they have over invoiced us by $118.08. But this amount is within the 10% overage of this project, so which is $118.19. So there is no overage violation. If this amount $118.08 were more than $118.19, that means it is more than 10% overage. What's the process is, we would reopen the invoice to allow you for adjust your application budget or invoice. If the invoice, and you will get the chance to work with our application coordinators to make those adjustments. So from these 2 slides, few points to remember. So there is a new 10% overage calculation process will be implemented from today, which is February 2nd, 2023, and it is only applicable for ARP invoices, and it will be project-based.
Mr. Moran, did you get your question answered? I know you had a question in the chat. Well, we can swing back. To it. Hold on to your seats, everyone, because there's lots of information in this particular office hour this morning. And I want to assure you that I'm going to talk a little bit to provide a basic overview of what to expect for this year's performance report. There will be more meetings, there will be more training sessions about the performance report. This is the overview I thought you'd like to know so you can kind of plan what your March is going to look like. So this will be a performance report. I'm calling it year 3 performance report because indeed it is year 3. I'm also referring to it in my own mind as the 2023 performance report, but it is for fiscal year 2022, as you can say. So we have to report to the federal government on May 4th, 2023, which means we have to gather data from you all. So there is a publicly available copy of the almost 50-page report that we have to report, and if you really, that we have to complete. If you really want to look at it, you can use the link that will be available in the slides, and it will bring you right to the report. So this report, as I just alluded to, is reporting on the fiscal year 2022, or July 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2022. And we're going to be starting to work on the details of what this reporting mechanism is going to look like on your end soon. This is all preliminary right now. We haven't really sat down and hammered out exactly what that's going to look like, but we hope to get it in your hands by the end of this month so that you have March to work on it. So, be thinking about this. It's going to be a performance report where you're going to need to be talking with some of your program folks about, what is actually going on in your guidance offices with mental health and social emotional learning, what's actually been going on in operations and maintenance and so forth. So we will be collecting the fiscal data and we'll be giving you exactly what you spent during during the reporting period. So that will be new this year. And we also want to remind you that the report will also be collecting those links to the publicly available information on your website that relate to the safe return to in-person instruction that has to be updated or reviewed and updated if necessary every 6 months, as well as the ARP funding summary, or what's it called? Use of the funds plans. And this might look a little bit different to you this year. We had to sort things out according to these categories last year in our report. So year 3 reporting, we'll be asking for amounts spent in those 4 categories at the top: the physical health and safety of students, meeting students' academic, social, emotional, and other needs is another category. Mental health is broken out as a separate category: mental health supports for students and staff. And then the last general category is operational continuity. And then notice, so this is like a 3-dimensional reporting grid. We will be asking for the amounts that you use to address those 4 categories from ESSER 1, from ESSER 2, and from ESSER 3. We're also going to be asking, and this is based on the federal government's request, that you break down the categories. Is it J through R? I can't really see it, it's small, but Salaries and benefits, for example, are separate. For purchase services, there's a request for a breakout between which of those are personal services, like, you know, like you're contracting with a person for psychological services or something, or purchase services for more of a mechanical thing. You're getting a company to come in and work with HVAC. So you'll notice that there are different categories of how the funds are going to be broken out. And you're also going to be requested for ESSER 2 to report on how you're going to be using the percentages of remaining funds in those categories of addressing physical health and safety, meeting students' academic, social, emotional needs, mental health, and operational continuity. So you're going to have that in mind. And remember, ESSER 2 is going to be ending September 30th, 2023. So, you have some funds remaining there, but it's going to be winding down. And there's a lot of interest, as you know, about how these funds are being used. And indeed, folks are interested, the federal government is interested in planned uses of the funds, remaining funds.
And just to clarify any confusion, this example is from ESSER 2, but they're asking similar questions for ARP ESSER 3 in addition to Carissa ESSER 2. However, this was an example that was all on one sheet that we were able to take and tie into our presentation.
Thank you, Shelley. So also the whole year and a half that you're going to have left of ESSER 3. All right, thanks. And there are going to be likely similar questions on the report that we asked from you that were very similar to what we asked last year, because we asked about, internet access, maintaining safe and in-person instruction, how you re-engage students, how you hired and retained for specific positions, and especially now for the ARP, information about your use of evidence-based interventions. And those grids about, the specific ways in which you used funds, that those questionnaires will likely be there too.
So there was a question in the chat box that I think is important that we address verbally. And the reason why we want to be sure that we're adding it to our recording in particular is because the question states, are we going to be tied to those plan uses in the slide before from the performance report? So when a district is reporting on these planned uses for the funding source, is this binding information? So as we know, your binding information is what has been approved in your application, in your funding application. So if you were at the time of completing the performance report thinking about spending 90% of your remaining funds on meeting mental health supports for students and staff, but through time, and your application reflects that, but over time that has transitioned based on stakeholder consultation, new identified needs, some goals that may have been analyzed and reviewed at the district level, there is an opportunity to shift that use of funds. So keep that in mind. In particular, I will indicate the way in which we established this information in the last performance report was based on your projects and which category they were in. As you recall, ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 in particular had big buckets. They had student supports, staff supports, community services supports, transportation, and that is how we indicated the planned use of funds. But essentially, we're extrapolating that information from a very fluid source, which is the application. So when you folks are thinking about what you need to indicate here on these planned uses, because we are going to collect that directly from you folks this year, please know that it's just that quick snapshot in time so that we can provide information to the U.S. Department of Ed.
And you'll be asked to provide FTE, full-time equivalent information based on we're saying September 30th, 2022. And it's both for, just like in last year's report, both for positions at the top, but then roles in number 2, like what roles how many people were working as the attendance supervisor, for example, or bilingual educator. So that's going to be distinct from number 1, where that bilingual educator might be counted as a teacher. But more about these finer details will be coming your way soon.
So this is one item, and as Karen alluded to, this information is hot off the press. We've just received this information from the U.S. Department of Ed not more than 48 hours ago. So we're trying to share as much with you folks as we currently have an understanding. We as a team have registered for a webinar that's taking place next week to get a little bit better understanding of what this next performance report is going to look like for the SEA, which in turn creates the look for the LEA. So for one item that is in the data source, which we've provided in the chat box, is the link to the public record of where we've acquired this information. They talk about student outcomes and sort of having this data. I am not sure, nor is the team sure, of how it's going to be collected. And we're hoping that this is one area in particular that we can pose some questions to the U.S. Department of Ed next week during that webinar to collect essentially what they are seeking in responses. Because we know that time is valuable. We know that your time is extremely valuable, and we don't want to pose questions that are not going to be utilized in the report that we are sharing with the U.S. Department of Ed. We want to be sure that we're pulling as much directly from your performance report as we can to utilize for the U.S. Department of Ed's report. The other notion that came about in that 49-page document is some future requirements, and not for this year, but sort of to get you thinking about, well, are we collecting that data? How are we collecting that data? What do we need to do to collect that data? So there's going to be a requirement in the future for SEAs to establish information about the LEA interventions and participation, the LEA student enrollment by student groups, and also the use of funds and the detailed reporting. So that section is, that last bullet is sort of referencing the right image. Again, not something that we're going to collect in this current performance report, but thinking about how, as an LEA, do we collect this data? And if we are not, what can we establish to be able to collect this data? Because the activities in this performance report is going to be by categories, by budget categories, salaries, supplies, and other, as Karen mentioned in a few slides earlier. But as you can see, they've modified that for next year to really be thinking about how much of this money, when you're talking about addressing physical and safety needs, is related to these categories, A through F.
So Keith has a couple of questions here, and from our view, Keith, it looks like you're unmuted. Apparently not.
So I'm just going to ask a follow-up question to Keith in particular, because the question in the chat box is, will these be broken down already in the performance report, or is this something we have to identify on our own? And I'm just checking to see if we're talking about the FTEs, if we're potentially talking about the budget and how it's broken down into these categories. So I want a clarifying response to be sure.
Right. And if he's
so let me try to unmute you again.
he's coming in as someone else, I think, as Messalonskee School District or School Unit, or Regional School Unit 18, I guess. Hi.
Hi, are you able to hear me now?
We can.
Okay, wonderful, awesome. So I have 2 or 3 questions now. Let's go back to, I guess, the last statement with regard to student data regarding graduation report and such. I'm just wondering, because to some extent it's kind of duplicative from my standpoint. We report that to the Department of Ed. Already in like 4, 5, and 6-year graduation reports. We report to, with regard to the civil rights data and all of that is turned in. Are we now asked to yet again report in a different way to the DOE to send this data on to the feds, or is this something that the state will be able to pull for us?
So unfortunately, not knowing the way in which the US Department of Ed would like to collect this information, I'm not sure that we have a response for you, Keith. We are well aware that we would not want to duplicate any efforts that you folks are already engaging in for other entities within the Department of Ed. So we would work with our colleagues, but we don't even have enough understanding of what the US Department of Ed is going to be collecting. This is something that's brand new, was not collected last year in last year's performance report. And essentially, the information that you see on this PowerPoint is all the information that was available on that ESEF reporting document. So until we have more information and until we have the ability to communicate with our colleagues within the department and have an understanding of what will be collected, we will exhaust every option not to collect something that we already have on hand.
Okay, that'd be, well, personally, I'm going to speak from my seat. It would be very helpful because I'm looking at chronic absenteeism, bullying reports, average daily attendance, all of those things we are mandated to report to the department already quarterly. So I just wanted to make sure that I was understanding that. The 10% rule, just to go back, Maisha had mentioned, exceeding the allowable budgeted items. And I'm just wondering, I think previous slides said beginning today, right? So effective today. I'm just wondering if those budgets had been exceeded by 10% prior to today, does that necessitate going in and adjusting those applications? And if so, what's the anticipated turnaround time for those things to be reapproved?
So our application review process is 2 to 3 weeks. In regards to previous invoices that may have exceeded 10% in the project budget, our team is doing a multi-step check. So if for some reason you potentially are in an area where you may be out of compliance in regards to the 20% learning loss requirement, we will likely return the invoice to you when we do stumble upon an overage that exceeded 10% in a remaining project. This new rule was essentially established by our team because as we're working with the US Department of Ed in our monitoring process, as well as our state auditors, they asked, how are you confirming that districts are spending 20%? And our logic is really in the application. Our logic and our test is that grid that we showed with some projects that never would be approved, just so we understand that this is a test site that we work on. If you were to overexpend, or this make-believe district was to overexpend in one of the remaining or additional projects, that potentially could compromise the 20% requirement because it is so close in regards to dollars. And that is what we're trying to establish and be sure that we're not setting up districts to be out of compliance of that requirement, hence the new 10% overage rule.
Yeah, my concern, I guess, from my standpoint is, on the flip side, if we've budgeted 20% of our overall funds in ARP. And now I'm exceeding my budgeted items in that 20% by 10%, right? So if I have vendors that are providing a service, right, to our district with regard to those allocated funds, I would be holding up payment for those local vendors who might be providing tutoring services to some of our students. And I just want to make sure that I'm aware of that, so that if it does exceed that 10% threshold, that I'm communicating with those vendors that it's about a 3-week process for this to be, reapproved, right? So that, thank you for that. And to be quite honest, again, I think this is a great way from a district standpoint to make sure that we're meeting that 20% threshold. I think it's a fantastic metric, I guess, to use. I'm just on the flip side, we've budgeted more than 20%, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I've budgeted enough in those categories. My concern is, again, overexpending that by 10%, holding up the invoicing and not being able to pay our vendors for those things. And then one last question, and I think with regard to the performance report, wondering whether or not those categories will be broken down, that detail of information that's being requested regarding support services, SEL, will that be broken up by project that we've submitted, or is that something that we're on our own and we have to start pulling data to fit in those buckets of info that are now requested?
It is the latter, because our ARP application is structured in regards to project-based. So you may have multiple projects that fit into one of these categories, and essentially there's not enough information for us as an SEA to say, well, this should be addressing physical health and safety versus meeting students' academic needs. That truly is a local decision in where they've established their metric and where to put that project.
I appreciate that answer. I'm just looking at it from a staffing point of view in our business office to start pulling reports in a different way. This is in the middle of budget season. This is quite a strain on our business office to start pulling in salary data that fit into a category that we did not anticipate having to do. So just feedback from either for the DOE or to pass on to the feds if they're disconnected with the budget process in Maine.
No,
Thank you.
we had a very similar reaction when we saw that they were asking it this way. Like Monique had a nice analogy. It's like we were collecting it one way and the U.S. Department of Education wants it another way. It was like a plaid situation. We had plaids rather than stripes going on.
And the way in which the application was generated, it was generated based on the allowable use, which is what was communicated to all of us at the time that the funding came out, that it would be collected. And as you can see, that has transformed over time. It has been consistent from last year to this year in regards to these categories. So if you have a structure in-house that you can denote a project to one of these 4 categories, that might be super helpful. And also, if you think about the way the ESSER 2 report and ESSER 1, not report, but application is structured, there are some large buckets. Student supports might be the projects that align to meeting students' academic, social, and emotional and other needs. So there are some ways in which you may potentially use the application and the projects and the categories that were established in your application. All right. So we will jump back right to where we were. Thank you for those questions.
Oh, sure. So back to other things related to ESSER. Some districts, and I don't know if anyone on this call right now is doing this, but someone looking at the recording may be in this situation, have decided to use ESSER funds based on their community plan and stakeholder input, are using ESSER funds for construction projects. So I'm just alerting folks that we're starting our second round of meetings with districts who are doing this. This is a risky use of the federal funds. Therefore, we're monitoring the projects much more closely than we are any of the other ESSER projects. And we'll be requesting individual Zoom meetings with school districts in the next month or two, maybe into 4 or 5 months, to discuss how those projects are going. And for anyone who's in that situation, there was an updated FAQ, and B6 is the section that outlines the uses, outlines the considerations to keep in mind if you're using ESSER funds for construction. And that section has been expanded in the newly revised FAQs. And I'm coordinating those meetings, and if you have questions about that, give me an send me an email. And as usual, we have resources on our website. And once you get this slide, you can click on those links and find those resources. And as many of you know, because you're here, every Thursday, first Thursday of the month, we have an office hour, whether we have lots of information or just a little information. This one was a lot of information, a lot of new information. There's a registration link for March. And
I'm going to put it in the chat box, but we'd also encourage you to share this registration link with colleagues, whether that be your curriculum director, your assistant superintendent, or your business manager. This information we feel is pertinent to many who are working within the emergency relief funding.
Right. And Shelley, I'm not sure if we've decided this, but we will have a separate meeting, or it may be the March meeting, I'm not sure, but one devoted to the performance report. And that will be one that we really want to make sure more than just the business manager is aware of that, because as you've already alluded to, you're going to have to capture some information from a number of different people in your district to complete that. And so, yeah, so there's the registration link. And we also put together a newsletter that comes out mid-month, and that's distributed. The link to it is distributed through the GEM system. So going way back to the very beginning, it's important that you have the right people receiving the information from the grant management system. And that's us. What questions do you have?
I think we are completely caught up with the questions from the chat box. Our team will stay on for a few additional minutes. If you have a question that you want to address to us specifically, go ahead and stay on. But otherwise, we appreciate you folks joining. We try to be as timely as possible with the information that we're sharing to you. So we try to preview any information. Also visit the newsletters, which provides additional information if we have it. So I alluded to a webinar about performance reports that we'll be attending next week, and that the newsletter comes out mid-month. So if we have established an office hour specifically for the performance reports, that would be included in our newsletter. So I encourage you to visit both entities, the office hours and the newsletters, should you have some additional spare time. Thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next month.
Question about Ian's performance report.
So Wendy, thank you for asking that question. Yes, there will be a performance report for Carissa Eames 1, Carissa Eames reallocated funds. That timeline is a little bit different than the ESSER performance report and has not accompanied any information. I noticed in the newsletter that we received from the U.S. Department of Ed at the beginning of the week that it alluded to potentially a June due date for us, but again, no additional information. And if we were to have a performance report when we have a performance report specifically for Carissa Eames and Carissa reallocated, we will definitely host an office hour to walk through that performance report. Perfect, thank you.
Shelley, I have a question.
Yes.
Now that we're kind of trying to wrap up ESSER 2, we've got bits and pieces of funding remaining in some projects because we're not necessarily getting down to the penny, but we also might need to reorganize some things. Are we still eligible? Are we still able to do that? We really want to be cleaning that up because I can see, even though that's September, I think that's looming much quicker than what I would care for.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you can. Go ahead and send me an email. I'm Karen, and I can open the application for you, and you can reallocate some of the funds to projects that have been approved, or if there's another project that you have that is an allowable use, you may add that and use the funds. We encourage you to use the funds.
Great. Thank you all for joining us.